everyone, and thank you for coming to my session, Happy DAGs and Happy Teammates, How a Little CI/CD Can Go a Long Way. My name is Leah, and in addition to being one of your MCs, I'm also a speaker today. I'm a developer relations engineer at Google Cloud, which means I'm a software engineer by trade, but instead of using those skills to build the end products in Google Cloud, I build tools and experiences that make it easier for other software engineers to use Google Cloud. My day-to-day varies, but it usually means doing things like writing sample code or tutorials, sometimes blog posts, and talks like this one. My focus is on Cloud Composer, which is Google's hosted managed version of Apache Airflow. In this talk, I will be focusing on Composer, but most of what I say will be able to be translated to other forms of Airflow as well. I'm an Airflow committer. I've been involved in the project since 2018, and one of the ways I stay most involved is as an organizer for the Airflow Summit, which just happened this past May. I would encourage all of you to check out the talk replays at airflowsummit.org and to keep an eye out for future events. And a fun fact about me, I love yarn crafts, I knit and crochet, and I love cats. I have 2 cats named Millie and Frank. All right, I know I can't see you, but if you could raise your hand along with me, if you've ever had a DAG that worked locally, but not when you deployed it, or maybe you've completely lost track of what you have and have not tried to make a DAG work. Maybe you've just seen the big red broken DAG error in Airflow. Or maybe you looked at Airflow and realized that the changes you made 3 days ago never actually got deployed to your environment. I'd say that these are situations where you're dealing with unhappy DAGs. You were probably unhappy, and if you have teammates, they may have been unhappy as well. And these are situations I have been in, all of them. The good news, though, is I do have some solutions I'd like to propose, and we can talk about putting them all together to hopefully make sure that we can greatly reduce the level of that unhappiness when working with Airflow. So let's start with that first problem, the classic stepping stone of every engineer, the "it works on my machine" problem. Let's say you work in a shared team Airflow environment, but you do most of your work locally. And when it comes time to push your work to deployed Airflow, something in the DAG's just not right. I think this happens fairly often. Airflow is pretty complex, and it has a lot of ways that it can be configured. We have all these connections that we have to manage. You're dealing with things like permissions, environment variables, configs that you can override. It just has a lot going on. The good news is I think there's a solution for that, and it's having multiple Airflow environments. So in other types of software engineering, we have multiple environments to ensure production stability for our end users. We should be doing that for our data pipelines too. At minimum, I recommend 2 Airflow environments in addition to whatever you're using for your local environment. And I'm going to call them dev, development, and prod, production. You know what works best for your organization in terms of naming, or if you want to have more than that. But the one caveat I'll say is the more you have, the more you have to manage. So let's talk about this potential 2 environments plus local dev scenario. You have your local environment. Maybe you're using something like Airflow Breeze. Maybe you're just running your own version of Airflow on your computer, whatever works for you. This is your environment. It's your sandbox. It's your playground. You can do whatever you want here. This is where you experiment and figure out all of the things with your DAG, at least as you're starting out. And once it's in like an okay-ish state, or where you're going beyond the capabilities of your local environment, you'll use that dev environment. This is where you can deploy DAGs if you need to work on them in a more realistic environment. Though if it's shared, be considerate of your teammates, and if you think that you're going to be making a mess, at least give them fair warning. You can debug your DAGs here because the configuration of this environment is going to be really similar to the configuration of your production environment. It's going to have the same version of Airflow. It should have the same version of Python packages. It should have the same plugins, and it should have the same types of connections. You should not actually have connections to your production data sources, but let's say that you have a connection to AWS in your production environment. You should also have a connection to AWS in your dev environment. The dev environment is also where you can do things like test out changes to the environment itself. Like if you're not sure what a new version of Airflow is going to do to your DAGs, if anything, this is where you'd try it out before putting it into production. The thing I recommend with your development environment, whether you're by yourself or with a team, is to keep a change log where you track what you do to the environment or what you're doing to debug your DAGs. That way, future you can learn from yourself, and future teammates and current teammates can learn from you. Now, finally, we have your production environment. This environment is tightly guarded because it's where your production pipelines run. You should do things like practice the principle of least privilege and only deploy DAGs here that have been thoroughly vetted and tested both in your local environment and in the development environment. Be strategic about when you put your DAGs in this environment. Is there a good time of day for things to go wrong, or at least awful time of day? That's probably when you should do your deployment if you can. And last but not least, you should have a rollback procedure in place. We're human, humans make mistakes, and also sometimes weird stuff happens with technology. It's much better to have a plan in place that you can follow before you need it. Okay, feeling a little happier now that we have those multiple airflow environments. But now, okay, what if you have a problem pipeline and you've tried a bunch of different things and you can't remember what you've tried and it's just not working, or like a DAG suddenly breaks and you go to fix it and you're like, oh man, I've had this problem before. I had to do it a few months ago. I don't remember what I did. Or, and I see this one a lot. You inherited a DAG from someone that you now maintain, and that someone is nowhere in reach, and you have no idea why this DAG is the way it is. This happens. The fix, though, I think, is version control. It's best practice to use version control to keep track of your production code. Teams want to be able to see when you made changes, what changes you made, who made them, and why. Doesn't that seem like info you'd want to have about your DAGs as well? There's no reason not to treat the DAGs like their production code, even if you work by yourself. So I have a proposal, 2 version control flows for you. One if you work by yourself, and one if you work in a team. So your solo flow, pretty simple. Make a commit, but give it a detailed message, not just like test. And then you push your changes to a branch. That commit message is a gift to your future self, and you'll thank your past self later when you read it. If you're on a team, pretty similar. Make a commit, again with a detailed message. You open a pull request, have your teammate review it, and then you merge those changes into your branch. Okay, feeling a little happier. We've got our version control, we've got our airflow environments, multiple, but what about the broken DAG error? Well, obviously, the solution is just fix your DAGs, but no, let's see, what can we do to reduce the number of times we have broken DAGs in the first place, besides using version control in multiple airflow environments? We can test them, but how? Okay, I'm not going to tell you exactly how, because there's a lot of different ways that you can do this, but I am going to tell you a few of those ways and provide links to some resources. And these slides will be available afterwards, so you can click on each of these links. So we test other production code before submitting it. Why not also do it with our DAGs, especially when there are so many resources for us to use? You can use the Airflow CLI or write a package that checks for syntax errors or task errors. You can write unit tests, and you should especially do this if you're writing custom hooks or operators. You can also do it to validate your DAG structure. In Airflow and in the provider packages, all of the operators and hooks do have unit tests, but if you're writing your own, this is where you definitely want to do it. You can run your DAGs in your local environment, or you can run them in your dev environment. And these are some testing resources that I was talking about earlier. There are some that are from Google, some that are from Astronomer, some that are from past Airflow events and blog posts. And who knows, maybe after this, you will learn so much about testing that you will write a blog post about it. And if you do, please share it with me. I'd love to read it. All right, we're testing our DAGs. We're using version control. We have multiple Airflow environments. What about the very human feeling of realizing you forgot to deploy the changes you made a few days ago? There's a fix. It's automation. In my lightning talk at the Airflow Summit in 2021, I told folks, robots are your friends. And I stand by this. And this is an excellent use case for automation. Why would you rely on an unreliable human to do something that automation can do much more reliably and consistently? With tools like Google Cloud Build or GitHub Actions, you can make sure the most up-to-date version of your DAG is in your Airflow environment. And you can do it when certain conditions are met, either when there's a change to that DAG, or you can just do it at a certain time interval, like every night you sync your DAGs with your environment, whatever makes most sense for you. So now that I've talked about these 4 things on their own, let's examine a combo of them in practice. So let's say I want to make a change to my DAG. I open up a pull request and it triggers some unit tests that I have running in Cloud Build. These unit tests check my DAG structure. They make sure it's valid and there's no cycles in it. My teammate reviews my DAG, and when they're happy with it, we merge it into our main branch. Once it's merged into our main branch, a Cloud Build automation job copies that DAG into my development composer environment. And this is where me and my team do our Airflow work together. Once it's there, I can take a look at it. And if the DAG fails, I'll address those failures, open up another pull request, and do those first few steps again. If it passes, then I will manually promote that DAG to production at an agreed upon time with my team. Now, you could automate the promoting to production job, but I personally prefer not to do it because I think it's good to have another human manual step of auditing. So the 4 components we talked about today. There's multiple Airflow environments. There's a development and a production Cloud Composer environment, and what's not pictured is the local development environment where I did a lot of my work. We have version control. I'm using GitHub with my team to keep track of the changes in my DAG. We have DAG testing, both in pre-submit unit tests that are triggered during my pull request and in the actual manual running of the DAG in a development composer environment. And we have automation, both in those pre-submit tests and in the copying of the DAGs to our composer environment. So now I have a quick demo for you where we can see what this looks like in action. All right, so here is my composer Airflow environment. We can take a look. I have this one DAG here, and all I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a comment above this first import to show this flow. So this is the storage bucket where my DAGs live. We can see it was updated at 3:25 p.m. I'm going to make a change in GitHub using the UI, where, as I said, I'm just going to add a comment right above that first import. I'll use the UI to create a pull request with a helpful description, following that nice little solo flow. And then I'll open a pull request. This will kick off automated unit tests running in Cloud Build. And if we go to the Cloud Build UI, we can see the test DAGs job running. It has a few steps. It installs requirements, and then it just runs unit tests that check the validity of my DAGs. So once they pass, I can pretend to be my own reviewer and go approve my pull request and merge it. And then that will kick off another Cloud Build job. So back in the Cloud Build UI, we can see this job is called Add DAGs to Composer, and it just has 2 steps: installing requirements and executing a Python script that copies DAGs from GitHub to the cloud storage bucket associated with our environment. That bucket I showed you earlier. That bucket previously said it was updated at 3:25 p.m. But if we take a look at it, we hit refresh, we can see it was updated at 3:31, so there are new changes in there. And then we can go back to our composer environment to Airflow, and if we refresh, we should see our test comment is right there, working exactly as we hoped. All right, thank you for joining me here today at Airflow Day. I will be answering questions during the live Q&A, and here are a few other resources for the slides and for other Airflow information and tutorials about how to run this flow. Thank you again for joining me.